All right, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we are headed out west to the high desert of Utah.
Beautiful country.
Oh, yeah, to a place that's been shrouded in
Yeah.
mystery and speculation for, well, decades, really.
Mm-hmm.
Skinwalker Ranch. You familiar?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Big name in the UFO world.
Huge. And so we're going to be using a couple of different sources to try to piece together uh, what exactly is going on out there.
Okay.
We've got the Joe Rogan documentary,
Mm.
Joe Rogan Questions, Everything Real Close Encounters.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Really good one. And then also just some excerpts and stuff from the Skinwalker Ranch Wikipedia entry.
Okay.
So really just kind of try to help you guys understand, what this place is all about.
Yeah, get a good overview.
Yeah. Then kind of help you form your own conclusions about what's going on.
Cool.
So maybe you could just give us a little bit of background on the ranch itself,
Mm.
geographically.
Mhm.
Where is it? What's the history of the place?
Sure, yeah. So Skinwalker Ranch is it's a 512-acre property. It's in Utah's Uinta Basin,
Okay.
and it actually borders a Native American reservation.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the name itself, Skinwalker, that actually comes from Navajo folklore.
Okay.
And it refers to, well, basically like a malevolent shape-shifting witch.
Oh, wow. So right off the bat, we've got a creepy name for this place, but it sounds like it's got a pretty interesting history, too. I mean, what exactly is it about this place that makes it such a hot spot for paranormal activity?
Well, there's been reports of strange happenings at Skinwalker Ranch going back like 50 years. UFO sightings, cattle mutilations, all sorts of strange creatures.
So you've got like the whole gamut of paranormal stuff going on out there.
Pretty much.
Now, is this all like anecdotal, or has there ever been any, hard evidence of anything weird happening out there?
It is mostly anecdotal, a lot of eyewitness accounts.
Okay.
But, I mean, the stories are pretty persistent. And when you look at the volume of these stories, and the range's history, I think that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah, you can't just ignore that many people saying something weird has happened.
Exactly. I mean, one of the kind of key stories about the ranch is this family, the Shermans.
Okay.
They bought the property in '94, and they started experiencing all kinds of bizarre events.
Like what? Give me an example.
Oh, weird lights in the sky. They had some cattle that got mutilated.
Yeah.
Pretty disturbing stuff.
I mean, that would freak me out for sure. No wonder they sold the ranch after just 2 years.
Yeah, I don't blame them. But that's when things get really interesting, because that's when Robert Bigelow enters the picture. This hotel tycoon who was super into UFOs.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
They buys the ranch for $200,000 in '96. Like, not chump change, but for a guy like him.
Yeah.
So he was serious.
Yeah.
And he founds this thing called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science,
Okay.
to really study this stuff.
So like actual scientists and researchers out there trying to figure out what's going on. Well, you'd think with all that money and manpower that have found something conclusive, right? Like,
Mhm.
what did they actually find?
It's interesting. They made a lot of interesting observations. There's tons of stories.
Yeah.
But, the research never really came to any hard and fast conclusions.
Yeah.
But Bigelow himself, he was convinced something was up. He even hinted that, there might be some danger.
Danger.
Yeah, with these UFOs, possibly something that happened on the ranch. He said something in a New York Times interview back in 2010.
Okay, so that's a little creepy. The idea that this could be like a threat or something, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think to really try to understand this, we need to hear from some of the people who claim to have had encounters at Skinwalker Ranch. And in Joe Rogan's documentary, he talks to a lot of these people. One of them is Steve Bassett.
Oh, yeah, the UFO lobbyist.
Right. What did he have to say?
Well, he talked about these Air Force officers who claim that UFOs messed with their nuclear missiles, caused them to, shut down and malfunction.
Whoa. That's a pretty big deal. Is there any, proof to back that up?
That's the thing. There's not really any hard evidence,
Okay.
which kind of leads to this bigger question that how do we balance these stories with the fact that there's no, physical proof?
Yeah. I mean, how many stories do you need to hear before you start to think, well, maybe there's something to this?
Right.
And then there's Nicole Dome, who believes she was abducted by aliens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And she shows Joe Rogan this star that she thinks is from, an alien implant.
And again, how do you prove something like that?
Yeah, tough one. And then you've got Daryl Sims, calls himself the alien hunter.
I remember him.
Yeah, he shows up with all these alien implants that he claims he's taken out of abductees.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't there something about a little girl and a snot?
Yeah. He claims this 6-year-old girl sneezed out these little metal spheres.
What?
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
And then Joe Rogan analyzed the spheres, and I mean, they were gold and silver, but there wasn't a definitive answer,
Right.
right?
Right. It was inconclusive.
So again, lots of questions, not a lot of answers. But speaking of questions, I'm really curious to hear your take on everything we've talked about so far. What stands out to you? What are you thinking?
It's definitely a lot to take in, you know? Like, on the one hand, you have all these people saying these things, and some of them seem pretty credible, right? Like, you've got military guys, you've got scientists, but then, like you said, there's just no real proof. So, I don't know, I'm kind of stuck between being, like, really interested and also trying to be, realistic about it.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
But I am curious to see what happened when Joe Rogan actually went out to Skinwalker Ranch himself.
Well, that's a whole other layer to this.
Okay.
Because he goes there, him and Duncan Trussell, with this idea that they're going to see something crazy. They're all set up with night vision and everything, ready to document it all.
Right, right.
And then they have this guide, Ryan Skinner, who's like making these Bigfoot noises, saying he's had his own encounters. Oh, I remember that. That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But I imagine that the ranch itself is probably, a pretty intense place, even without Bigfoot calls.
Oh, yeah. It's like a super high security place.
Right.
Yeah. Armed guards, barriers, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
Like, way more security than you'd expect for just a ranch,
Yeah.
And they even had these things called beat pens set up, I guess, to try to attract whatever's causing the cattle mutilations.
So they were taking it seriously then. Well, did they find anything? I mean, did they see anything weird out there?
So even with all that and all the buildup, they didn't actually see any UFOs.
Oh.
But they did see some weird lights, some heat signatures, things they couldn't explain.
Hmm.
Which brings up a good point, though. Like, just because we can't see something, does that mean it's not there?
That's true.
What we can measure and observe, it's always changing as technology gets better.
Right. Yeah. Makes me think about all the theories about electromagnetic fields at Skinwalker Ranch. Could that be connected to what people are seeing?
Possibly. We know that those fields can mess with electronics, even our bodies. There's still so much we don't know about them.
So maybe Skinwalker Ranch is just in a spot where those fields are really strong or different or something.
It's possible. I mean, there could be something geological going on, too, that we just haven't figured out yet.
Okay, so you've got these possible scientific explanations, but then you also have, like, the Navajo legends about skinwalkers. How do those fit in?
That's where things get really interesting. It makes you wonder if maybe there's something connecting those two things.
Like science and folklore.
Yeah. Maybe our understanding of the world just isn't complete yet. The Navajo have been there for a long time. They have a different way of seeing things. Maybe there's something to that.
That's a good point. I mean, different cultures have different ways of understanding the world. And then there's Mike Miller.
Oh, yeah, the local guy. He claims he's seen a bunch of UFOs out there.
Right. He told Joe Rogan about seeing this big rectangular craft over his truck, and then these orange lights shooting across the sky. It's tough, because it sounds convincing, but...
No proof.
Right. It makes you wonder, how much can we trust eyewitness accounts? Especially with stuff that's already hard to explain.
I mean, it's definitely something to consider. Our brains can play tricks on us, right? Sometimes we see what we want to see, or we fill in the blanks.
Yeah, like we try to make sense of things, even if we don't have all the information.
Exactly. It doesn't mean that everyone's making stuff up, but it does mean we have to be careful. And remember, just because we haven't found evidence doesn't mean something isn't there.
True. We're limited by our own tools and understanding, right?
Right.
Well, it's not like Skinwalker Ranch is one of those places where there are a lot of weird things happening, but we don't really know why. It's like science and folklore and the paranormal all mixed up together.
Exactly. It forces us to question what we think is possible, and admit that there's still a lot we just don't know.
So we've talked about a lot of different things, eyewitness accounts, scientific theories, the cultural side of things. And it seems like every time we get close to an answer, we just end up with more questions. Is that, like, normal for these kinds of mysteries?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Yeah.
Especially with stuff like UFOs and the paranormal. There aren't always clear answers.
Right.
It can be frustrating if you're looking for proof, but it also kind of shows you how big and mysterious the universe really is.
Yeah. It's kind of humbling, right, to
Yeah.
think that there could be all this stuff happening that we just don't even understand yet. Out of everything we've talked about, what do you think is the most interesting or maybe the most confusing part of Skinwalker Ranch?
For me, it's this idea that science and the unexplained can coexist.
Okay.
You have these scientists and military people who you'd think would be all about facts and proof.
Right.
but they're seeing things that just don't make sense. And then you have the locals who have their own stories and beliefs that have been passed down for generations.
Right.
It's almost like those two ways of seeing the world are clashing.
It's like this constant back and forth between trying to prove things and just accepting that some things are beyond our understanding, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have to say, after doing this deep dive, I definitely have more questions than answers,
Hmm.
but I also feel kind of, I don't know, a little more awe about the
Mm.
universe, I guess.
I think that's a good thing. It's not always about finding the answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions, being open to new ideas, and just being curious.
So, for anyone listening who's interested in Skinwalker Ranch, what advice would you give them? Like, how can they learn more, but also, not get lost in all the conspiracy theories and stuff?
Be critical, but also keep an open mind. Read different sources. Talk to people who have different viewpoints. Don't be afraid to question things. And most importantly, stay curious. Maybe one of our listeners will be the one to finally figure out what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch.
I mean, that would be amazing. It's cool to think that there are still mysteries out there just waiting to be solved.
Yeah.
So, listeners, what do you guys think? Is Skinwalker Ranch evidence of something truly strange and unknown? Or is there a simpler explanation for everything that's been recorded? We want to hear your thoughts. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking up at the sky. You never know what you might find.